Hi, welcome to the Acids and Bases chapter. In this chapter, we will be covering the Bronsted-Lowry acid-base theory, strength of acids and bases, self-ionization of water, dissociation of a weak acid and base, and salts and buffer solutions. In this first part, we will look at an introduction to acids and bases. All of us should be very familiar with acids and bases, and we encounter many acids and bases in our daily life. For example, for acids, we encounter kojic acid in soya sauce, lactic acid in kimchi, citric acid and ascorbic acid in fruits, and acetic acid in vinegar. We also encounter many bases such as sodium hydroxide in soap, potassium hydroxide in alkaline batteries, and sodium bicarbonate in baking soda. In your lab practical, you have also done an acid-base titration between potassium hydrogen thalate and sodium hydroxide. Here's a chemical equation of a neutralization reaction between an acid and a base. Looking at the reactants, how do you know which is an acid and which is a base? The Arrhenius theory on acids and bases was introduced in 1887. According to this theory, an acid is a substance that produces H+ ions in aqueous solution, whereas a base is a substance that produces OH- ions in aqueous solutions. However, some bases are not covered by this definition. For example, what about ammonia? Ammonia is a weak base. It turns litmus paper blue, and it reacts with acids just like other bases, but it doesn't contain any OH- group. In 1923, a broader definition of acids and bases was proposed by Bronsted and Lowry. According to this theory, acids are proton donors, whereas bases are proton acceptors. The word proton here refers to the hydrogen ion H+. Okay, why is H+ called a proton? If you think about the hydrogen atom, it consists of a proton and an electron. So if you remove an electron from a hydrogen atom, what's left is a proton. To simplify chemical equations, we often write the hydrogen ion as H+. But in fact, H+ does not exist in a solution as a free particle. In aqueous solution, H+ binds to a water molecule H2O to form H3O+. So the acid component in an aqueous solution is really the H3O+ ion called the hydronium ion. Let's look at two chemical reactions. HCl dissociates in water to form H3O+ and Cl-. In this reaction, HCl is an acid because it donates a proton or hydrogen ion to water. HNO3 also dissociates in water to form H3O+ and NO3-. Similarly, HNO3 is an acid because it donates a proton or H+ ion to water. These chemical equations are called acid dissociation equations. According to the Bronsted-Lowry theory, bases can be all species that accept a proton. They do not necessarily have to release OH- ions. Let's look at some examples. In the reaction between HCl and H2O, H2O acts as a base because it accepts a proton from HCl to form H3O+. When HCl reacts with NH3, NH3 acts as a base because it accepts a proton from HCl to form NH4+. And when the bicarbonate ion reacts with H2O, H2O acts as a base because it accepts a proton to form H3O+. There's another thing to note here. Did you realize that some of the arrows are different? In the first two chemical reactions, the arrow points in a single direction, meaning this is an irreversible reaction. HCl is a strong acid. When either a strong acid or strong base is involved in the reaction is irreversible. On the other hand, the bicarbonate ion is a very weak acid. In fact, it often acts as a base instead. Water is also a very weak base. And in fact, we usually don't even think of water as a base. When a weak acid reacts with a weak base, the reaction is reversible. Now that we've looked at the definition of acids and bases, let's explore conjugate acids and bases. A conjugate acid-base pair differs from each other by one proton. Let's look at the example here to illustrate. An acid can be represented by HA. A stands for acid, but A could really be anything. For example, HA could be HCl, HNO3, etc. The conjugate base of the acid is the acid minus a proton. Here, the conjugate base is represented as A minus. A base can be represented by B. B stands for base, but again, this could be any base, such as hydroxide, ammonia, etc. The conjugate acid of the base is the base plus an attached proton. So here it is represented as BH+. Using the concept we've just gone through, take a look at each of these equations. Identify the acid and base on the left side of the equation, then identify their conjugate base and acid on the right side of the reaction. Press pause to try the question yourself, then press play to view the answer. For question A, HBr is the acid and NH3 is the base. Br- is the conjugate base of HBr, and NH4+ is the conjugate acid of NH3. For question B, H2S is the acid and NH3 is the base. HS- is the conjugate base of H2S, and NH4+ is the conjugate acid of NH3. For question C, H3PO4 is the acid and H2O is the base. H2PO4- is the conjugate base of H3PO4, and H3O+ is the conjugate acid of H2O. Not all substances are clear acids or bases. Some substances can act either as an acid or a base. We saw earlier that water can act as a base when it reacts with acid because it accepts a proton from the acid. But when water reacts with a base such as ammonia, it can act as an acid because it donates a proton to the base. For acids, it's also important to know whether an acid is monoprotic or polyprotic. Monoprotic or monobasic acids only have one ionizable H atom and will donate only one proton. For example, HCl and acetic acid CH3COOH. This will only donate one proton. On the other hand, polyprotic acids have more than one ionizable H atom and can donate two or more protons. For example, H2SO4 can donate 2 protons and H3PO4 can donate 3 protons.